Toronto is a city of 630 square kilometers, with 158 neighborhoods and more than 3 million people, each with their own story to tell. This is For the Love of TO.
Hi, everyone. I'm here with Andrew Graham. He is the co-founder and CEO of Borrowell, one of Canada's largest FinTech companies based right here in Toronto. Andrew also sits on several boards, including the Canadian Club of Toronto and Civic Action. He's a husband, a father of three, a cyclist, and a fellow East Ender. Thank you for joining me on For the Love of TO, Andrew. Welcome to the show.
Thrilled to be here.
Um, we met riding bikes, and you're a lot of things, but you're an athlete. You're pretty quick. You do the multi-sport stuff. You do the running, the swimming, and the cycling. I think they call that triathlon. It's been a hot one here in Toronto this season. How's your training going?
Well, it's nice of you to call me an athlete. I think there's a variety of midlife crises we can all have, and I've tried to convince my wife that this is a cheaper and less complicated one than trying to get a sports car or something like that. So this has been what I've dived into, and Toronto's a great city for all those things. I love running in the ravines. I run by in the Don Valley, and there's lots of great cyclists around, including myself.
Okay, and you get out in the lake? Is that where you do the laps, or are you more a pool guy?
Both. So the Toronto Triathlon Festival is coming up in just a couple of weeks, and the swim for that race takes place in Lake Ontario, right near Ontario Place, actually. So it's always sort of fun getting in the water there, and then getting to ride up the DVP as well, which is closed for that race. So it's a lot of fun.
We love all the big events. We love sports. We like a culture where we're competing. I think that's a mentality that, governments need to think about. How do we compete? And that is also the mentality for founders and for folks who are starting and building things and making bets. And, you are one of those. So first of all, tell us a little bit about Borrowell. What is that? And how did it come to be?
Sure. So Borrowell is a company that helps consumers feel more confident about their money. We all know how complicated personal finances can be. And what Borrowell does is we were the first company in Canada to offer your credit score for free with us. And it will help you find the best financial products, the best credit cards, the best savings accounts, the best mortgages. Will help you put together the right grouping of financial products for wherever you are in your life, whether you're new to Canada and new to credit, or whether you've got a great credit score and are looking to find, the best credit card with the best travel rewards. We can help you wherever you are in that journey, figure out what the right combination of financial products for you is.
It's super practical and interesting. I remember I'm embarrassed to say this, but had the same credit card, I guess, for a long time, like maybe since the beginning. And I remember doing an afternoon of sort of Googling and figuring out, okay, like what is the best credit card or financial product for my needs? And I've sort of been set and forget it. But that was a bit of work back then. It's nice to know that, there are people and businesses that are kind of optimizing that. And maybe it's time for me to take another look at that.
You should. I mean, we have over 3 million Canadians who have signed up. At this point, 1 out of 10 Canadian adults is a Borrowell member, has created an account with us. So you would be in good company if you decided to do that.
All right, we'll take a look. What is also interesting is you are a founder, and there is this founder mentality. You didn't start Borrowell out of nowhere. You were working somewhere else, but this was a mission and a journey that began back in 2014. So you were working somewhere else, but what was that journey like for you personally to say, I'm going to leave corporate Canada, the work I'm doing, I'm going to put my chips all in the middle of the table. I'm going to bet on myself, and I'm going to build something. What was that like, a decade and a year ago, and where you are now?
Sure. So I got some great advice in my career that regardless of what kind of job you have, whether you're in a big company or your own startup, there's always going to be bad days, and you need to decide ultimately what kind of bad day are you comfortable with.
Huh.
I worked in large companies for part of my career, and a bad day at a large company is about frustration, right? You can't get your project approved by your boss's boss or what have you. Whereas
So it's almost bureaucracy.
it is bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
something that you, of course, are very adept at cutting through.
Mhm.
Whereas if you're at your own company, and I'm sure many of your listeners, anyone who's ever run their own business can relate to this, a bad day is about fear. Am I going to make payroll next week? I just lost my key employee or my key customer. How am I going to, keep going? And so, certainly in the early days of a startup, whether you're in tech or whatever you're doing, that sense of fear can be palpable, and getting through that is important. And so when I looked at my own life and my own feelings, I was much more comfortable dealing with that fear emotion than the frustration emotion. And I thought, as much as I've enjoyed my career in corporate Canada, it's time to go build something that I want to build. And so I left and ultimately founded Borrowell.
Can I Am I better at coping and managing the feeling of fear, or am I better coping and managing with frustration? That was the sort of calculus. Starting a business is a daunting task. Starting it out of nothing, big decision. Did you have a good sense of how to do this? Was it mentors, coaches? Was it we came up with this great idea to service Canadians in the financial space? Like, where do you even start? Does it start as a conversation at home with your spouse and say, "Hey, kicking around this idea, a little bit risky, might have some fear, but how do you start that?"
I think that the place to start. Well, first of all, yes, it's important to get getting your spouse on board if you're going to quit your job and go off on your own. I think the real place to start if you're starting a business, though, is what's the problem I want to solve.
Mm.
It's always better to fall in love with a problem rather than fall in love with a solution, because I can tell you that the solution is going to evolve if you're a good entrepreneur. It almost always does. But the problem that I've always really found so compelling is if you have a lot of money in this country, you can get good financial advice. You can get tax planners and financial planners. But if you're, like most of the population, those sorts of services just aren't affordable. But how can we use technology to make those sorts of services available to everybody? And that, of course, is even more the case today with all the advances in AI. So it's just so exciting now, trying to build tools to help, all Canadians make the best financial decisions that they can.
So laser focused on what the problem is, not married to the solution, but by tackling the problem, let the solutions present themselves.
Exactly. And you need to get that feedback from the market because, you kind of don't know what you don't know. We started Borrowell making loans, helping people with credit card debt, which many of us carry, refinance that debt at a lower rate. And that worked okay. But what we found was not many people knew their credit score. They didn't know what would be the best solution for them. And so we, were able to launch Canada's first free credit score. And, the business has sort of evolved from there.
So you got 3 million subscribers of the service. That must require a bunch of horsepower and capacity on your side. Do you remember what it was like staffing up and hiring, making your first hire?
Yeah, I mean it's always daunting, especially those first few hires are so important when money is really tight and you need someone who's gonna come on board and hopefully feel as passionate and excited about the business as you do. And in those early days, it really is a 24/7 type experience, and you need people who are into that. The good news is there's lots of people in Toronto who are ambitious and who want that sort of opportunity. And we've really never had trouble finding terrific talent in the city.
Toronto's not a city that lacks ambition. Um, Sometimes I think we lack on the execution, but there are a lot of folks who are very bullish on this city. Was there a particular reason why you decided to found Borrowell here in Toronto? Why you wanted to make that bet and build it here versus other markets? There are other cities in Canada and certainly around the world where you could have done that. What was the attraction of Toronto? Why did you choose to be here?
Look, I think Toronto is a great place to live, and my wife and I had decided that this was where we were going to start our family. And I believed then, and still believe now, that you can build a big, large business based in Toronto, and we can certainly point to many Toronto founders who have been able to build large businesses here. There are pros and cons to building in Toronto, and we may get into some of that policy. Really, it's about building in Canada as much as it is about building in Toronto. That make it more challenging in some ways. I think as a country, we need to get much more laser focused on how do we help big businesses get built from scratch in this country.
Is there a aversion in our politics to businesses that are built and find success and are doing well? Sometimes I feel like people bridle at success. If you get too big and too successful, there are folks, elected officials, pundits, commentators, people that want to tear you down. Um, do you ever feel like when you look around founders of other big successful companies here in this country that there aren't necessarily as many cheerleaders celebrating that success as there ought to be?
I think from an attitude perspective, it's true that the United States really does stand apart in terms of celebrating entrepreneurial success. I think Canada, uh, you know, has come some ways, but it's true that it's maybe not the natural reflex for everybody. There is more of a feeling of, in some cases, a feeling of that yeah, the instinct is to say either pay more taxes or that building a big company. What are there benefits to the country with that, or is it negative or positive? So I think there's more we could do. I think the most important thing for political leaders at all levels in Canada is to change the mindset about what success looks like. I think our problem has been too often we celebrate branch plants that we get really excited, or a politician will go to the opening of a Google office or an Amazon plant or whatever. And look, those it's fine to have those things, those kinds of businesses here. But what real success looks like, and I think what many other countries have figured out, is that what real success looks like is having businesses that are headquartered in Canada do really well and get big. And then you have the headquarter jobs, the C-level jobs that are here. You have that larger tax base, and you hopefully have people that do really well and make some money, can pay more taxes, can donate to the hospitals. And I think sometimes we forget that we sort of think, hey, it's just as good having a branch plant as it is having a headquarters, having a local company be successful. And I think that's just not right. We need to say what success looks like is having a local company do well and become a global champion.
And so you say branch plant? Is that branch offices?
Yeah,
And
that's right.
yeah.
Exactly.
So in a sense, you want startups here in Toronto to grow and scale, have a national presence, and then a demand for those to become international businesses with a global reach. And really, the objective then should be to have satellite offices or branch plants in other countries, exported from Toronto, from Canada, out to abroad.
That's exactly right.
And we don't maybe see enough of that.
I don't think we see enough of it, and I don't think our policies at various levels of government do that. So, to give you an example, there's an important tax credit that the federal government's had for many years, called SHRED. That's the acronym. That is to encourage research and development. And look, there's been lots of discussion of whether that works or not. But what's curious about it is it doesn't distinguish between Canadian headquartered businesses doing research and development here or international ones. And so the irony is that some of the biggest recipients of SHRED have been non-Canadian headquartered businesses, where the research and development work that's happening here, all the intellectual property, the patent filings, everything else ends up getting owned by a company headquartered somewhere else. So we're essentially, giving Canadian tax dollars, that supports, the filing of intellectual property in other jurisdictions, which seems kind of bizarre and not how many other countries work.
When I don't necessarily intuitively understand a policy, and that happens a lot here at City Hall, or an objective, I try and wrap my head around, okay, what would the rationalization for that be? So in the instance of Shred, R&D dollars that are flowing to businesses headquartered elsewhere, they're taking that IP and the commercial opportunity and they're taking it abroad. What is the rationalization? Why has it been set up that way for years? What would the government say in defense of that?
I think there's been a traditional view that all these programs are about jobs. You want to have researchers based here in Canada. Those are jobs that typically pay well. And so if we're trying to encourage jobs, who cares what company employs them, right? As long as the research jobs are here. And I think that's kind of the old way of thinking. And certainly in physical industries, like if you're building cars, for example, having a big factory here has a ton of benefit. I think there's relatively less benefit having the branch plant, perhaps of a global technology company here, versus having a Canadian headquartered technology company here.
Because the real upshot is not the research jobs, although important and good and a nice to have. It is the commercial opportunity on whatever's coming out on the other side of that research.
Yeah,
That's
exactly right. And if you look at employment, It's not like there's a big employment problem among software developers. It's not like there's a big employment problem amongst AI researchers. I don't know if we need to encourage, I don't know if we need to subsidize the employment of an AI researcher, right? So it's not. I think it's sort of an old way of thinking.
Mm. That is a really good point. If we want to, again, if the end goal and success is having Canadian companies based here in Toronto start up, build, globalize, um, what do we do to create an environment where Toronto is a desirable destination to start a business, to found something? What do we do to encourage that at the ground floor level, like where you came in 2014? Are there things local government or provincial or federal governments can do to make sure that people want to build it here?
I think all the quality of life and affordability issues that you are working on, Brad, and many others are working on matter a lot. It's hard when you are an early stage business. Often you're paying your employees lower salaries and you're incentivizing them with stock options, perhaps. And so, in a situation like that, being able to afford housing is even more important, right? It becomes even more of a challenge if the housing stock is super expensive. Then how are early stage employees going to be able to live here?
Because you can't pay your rent with stock options.
Is that exactly right? That's
Oh,
right.
okay. So access to the things that would make Toronto desirable for anyone, that of course holds true for founders and for folks who are building something. So that is housing that people can afford. That is transit that is safe and
Absolutely.
reliable. That is a city that you can navigate, in a vehicle or on a bicycle or as a pedestrian, and it's safety. Those are, when I think about what's important for local government, those are kind of the hallmarks, the things that we need to focus on, be able to raise a family, build a business, and have access to opportunity. If we want to, in part, be a destination for folks, the top talent in the country, and in fact, from around the world, we kind of have to get the basics right at a local level to make sure that they consider Toronto is on their short list to go and do it.
That's exactly right.
Are there other things that, from a local government, we employ 50,000 people at the city of Toronto? Then there's a ton of jobs through our agencies, whether it's Toronto Hydro, TTC, police, fire, all that sort of stuff. Um, do you think about how local government interfaces with the fintech space, financial technology, and startup culture or bigger companies? Is there a role there?
I think that procurement is an area that all levels of government in Canada, including municipal, could look at. So, all those agencies you mentioned, the City of Toronto, all everyone buys stuff, whether it's software or what have you. And so how do we create an environment where earlier stage companies that are based here in Toronto can compete? I mean, they've got to have products that are going to meet the needs. The pricing needs to be right. But I think something that not many people appreciate is when you look at the history of Silicon Valley, like, why is there such a successful technology cluster in Silicon Valley? One of the earliest subclusters in Silicon Valley was microchips, like essentially, the physical chip industry. And so uh, how did it come to be that it was based in Silicon Valley? Well, you had some early stage companies who found as their early buyers the U.S. government and specifically the Department of Defense that needed microchip technology to various things. But there was this great symbiosis where you had the U.S. Department of Defense saying to these early stage microchip companies, "Here's what I need, here's what I want," and so on and so forth. And they both got what was helpful. The chip companies, Fairchild Semiconductor, et cetera, got a great customer, a big customer, and the Department of Defense got a domestic industry producing the kind of microchips that it needed for what it was building. And I think there's a lot to learn there, right? So Silicon Valley didn't just come up without the help of government. In fact, the opposite is true.
That's interesting because you were saying earlier this sort of old approach of we want those research jobs here, so we'll subsidize the research even if the commercialization upside is out of country. Historic approach, you look at like military procurement, and I'm not an expert on that, but even shipbuilding, we want to build those ships for better or worse in this country, those jobs, those investments, those dollars staying here. When we talk about tech space, there isn't the same sort of draw or, um, I don't know, incentive to go and purchase or work with Canadian companies. And maybe that's because governments are inherently risk averse and the startup culture is sort of, I don't know, like early businesses, we don't necessarily know if they're going to be successful or if they're going to be around here in a couple years. But I feel like in the tech space for a long time, you've had elected officials, the city and other places that want to be a champion for tech. They want to go out and speak at the Collision conference and say, Toronto's tech scene is the best and you should be here. And we need that.
Yeah.
But maybe a better role is actually, how do you be an earlier backer? How do you help with the process of commercialization? If you got a City of Toronto contract or province of Ontario or something, that would probably be very meaningful for an early company that's trying to show their chops, demonstrate success, build a portfolio and a track record. And if you had a procurement policy that is geared towards supporting the industry that is coming out of these cities, provinces, and countries, assuming they're providing competitive pricing and solutions that are what are needed, that might actually be a better approach to support tech versus just being a booster or a cheerleader on the sidelines.
Yeah, you're right. Look, there's nothing more valuable to an entrepreneur than earning revenue or getting a customer. That's far more important than going to any conference or frankly even getting investment funding. Ultimately, getting a customer, getting revenue is the most important.
You've been doing this now, I guess you're what, 11 years, 10 years plus? Okay. Well, congratulations. I think you're not really a small business anymore by any stretch, but people that make that bet on themselves and the people around them, it is such a challenging environment to do that in this city, in this country. And the odds in many ways are kind of stacked against us. I think you just look at the success rate of businesses and it's, you got more that are failing than are successful, right? What have you seen over the past 11 years of building this thing that has changed the ecosystem that you're operating in the fintech space? So, would seem to me that we had a decade of investment and cheap capital and people issuing loans and investing, and then we had a global pandemic, and now we're sort of teetering on a recession. All the while, AI has continued to proliferate and is becoming more mainstream and consumer facing. So, what are the things that stand out since you started, and how have you been responding to that? Where are we headed?
So you're right. There's been many cycles in global tech. I think it's been exciting to see that there has been in my industry, in financial services technology and fintech, a rise of companies that have reached a degree of scale. Headquartered here. And that's been really exciting. It's been exciting to see consumers willing to try new companies with their investments or with, to make payments with credit cards. That's been really, really exciting. I think where we still have a long way to go is getting some of the infrastructure right. It's sort of ironic that we're a country and frankly a city where you have such a strong financial services industry. We have a number of very, very strong banks that are very competitive, even at a global scale.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a relatively small financial service fintech sector. So, a number of very, very large banks, a relatively small and domestically focused fintech sector. On the whole, we've had some companies that have found successes in other jurisdictions. But if you compare Canada to, say, Brazil, Brazil's birthed a number of very large, global fintech companies. There's a consumer-facing fintech in Brazil called Nubank that I was reading today has over 110 million customers now across Latin America. There's just not really a Canadian equivalent of that yet. And I think part of it is we just don't have the government environment here that promotes financial technology. I would love to, one of the things that we talk about a lot is we would love to see open banking rules, better payment modernization.
Explain open banking. I know it's a term that's thrown around and people have heard it, but for listeners, what exactly does that mean?
It really just means having control of your own data. So you have a bank account somewhere and you've got a series of transactions there. Open banking means if you want to, show those transactions to maybe another mortgage lender so they can get a sense of your cash flows in and out as a way to find better pricing for you, you should be allowed to do that.
Right.
That's really all.
It's your data. It's your information.
Data. You should be able to do that. Today, it's very hard. There's no rule that says your bank has to let you show that data. So, we just want more competition and better pricing. That's an example of legislation that would make that possible.
And then again, as we examine the other side of that, the folks that have an entrenched vested interest in how it is, and maybe some of the big institutions that don't necessarily want more competition, they would be less favorable around open banking or things that make it easier to shop around and more competition. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've certainly seen some attitudes like that. I think when you look at the mandates that are parts of government have. So, for example, if you look at the organizations that um, that regulate banking and finance, they almost all have a protection only mandate. So they say, how do we make the system as safe and stable as low cost? You also want competition. So expanding those mandates to say, yes, safe and stable, but also let's have more competition. Let's also have more choice for consumers. Those would be small changes that would make a big difference.
Um, and when you engage in advocacy, I should mention, I think you're also the chair of FinTech Canada. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So that's an advocacy organization that would approach government with ideas, challenges, solutions in the financial tech space. What has been your approach to advocacy, and what has your track record of success been on behalf of the industry?
I think we always try to tie our advocacy to the stated goals of the governments we talk to. And, you know, uh, as much as I want to see the growth of the fintech sector, which I do, my belief is that a stronger fintech sector in Canada will mean lower prices and more competition and things, and also ultimately we really try to tie back what we talk about to affordability. So we talked about open banking a minute ago. That will lead to more affordable, lower cost, banking and mortgages, et cetera, for consumers. So that's how we really try to frame this, to say this is about affordability. Whatever you think about the fintech industry, whether you want to see it grow or you don't care, this is ultimately about making financial services better. There's lots of data that says that financial services in Canada are pretty extensive by global standards. So let's try to bring those costs down.
If you Google Andrew Graham, you'll see he's written a number of very thoughtful editorials in prominent Canadian papers. But there was also a movement in this last federal election over the past few months, Build Canada, that was a number of founders and entrepreneurs that were writing really compelling and interesting and sometimes provocative policy positions and putting that out onto the internet for everybody to consume. How where did that come from, and did you guys see value in that in terms of shaping a national discourse around these types of subjects?
I mean, Build Canada is a really terrific organization, a real terrific movement that came out of a number of people. I mean, Dan DeBow, formerly of Shopify, has played a key role in the founding and creation of Build Canada. And then a number of us founders, were sort of pulled in by Dan fairly early on to say, let's try to focus the discussion around in the upcoming election, and even beyond that, around our issues and solutions for making entrepreneurship, for building companies better here in Canada. So I think it's a group of people who are, for the most part, founders, people that have built businesses, and we try to share perspectives on how policy could change to do that in a variety of ways, whether it's people like Michael Serbinis, who's a serial entrepreneur who knows a lot about the healthcare space, writing about the portability of healthcare records and how that would help care. I wrote a paper on open banking and basic data portability. So there's been a lot of interesting work come out of Build Canada, and I think it's a really exciting movement.
And something that has legs, because while this last election is over, there will be more elections to come, and no one has a license on all the good ideas. So that diversity of thought and opinion, and I think you guys should be commended for putting those ideas on paper and putting them out there. That's how we have meaningful dialogues and discussions. The last thing I want to talk on is mentorship. I'm sure you had some counsel when you started in 2014, probably reached out to people that gave you some advice. And now, a decade later, and a tremendous amount of success in building one of the most successful fintech companies around, I'm sure you have folks that reach out to you as they are in their startup journey or entrepreneur journey. What type of advice are you giving to folks that are looking to sort of replicate your success in a different way?
Well, look, that's kind of you to say, and I still benefit from lots of advice and mentorship, right? I mean, there's always people that have built businesses that are larger and more successful than your own. And certainly my case, so I've got a terrific board of directors and a group of lots of people, friends who I can call and get advice from. So that never stops. I think if you're gonna aim for growth, I think one thing that's been gratifying is we've really tried hard. I think like all founders do, I guess, to make Borrowell a great place to work. And it's been fun seeing a number of our early employees leave and start their own businesses. And that's been really gratifying. I think the advice I'd have for anyone out there who wants to found a business, first of all, I think it's never been such an exciting time to found a technology company. The rise of generative AI is really changing what's possible and making it less expensive and less hard, if you will, to get that first product to market. I'm not an engineer, but I've been doing a lot of work, vibe coding, right? So getting AI assisted help to write code or write programs. And so if I can do it, there's a lot of many people. Everyone can do it. So I think it's a great time to build. Would be my first thing, and I think the second thing is if as long as your personal situation allows, the key thing to do is just making the decision to go, right? Making that decision to say, I'm going to put a flag in the ground and I am going to build a business to solve a problem in this space. That first step is the hardest step. And I think once you've done that and committed to it, to yourself and to your friends and your colleagues, that's the most important step.
Changing gears, bringing it down to the East End. How long you lived out in the East there with us?
It's been about, I guess it's going on just almost 7 years that we've been there. We love the East End.
Okay, what's a favorite restaurant in Danforth area there? Put you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's lots of places we like. I think it's hard to go wrong with Allen's.
Oh, I was gonna say Allen's.
It's a terrific place. It's that
I eat the burgers.
the burgers are great. Great selection of beers if you're into that.
I am.
And that patio at the back in the summer, where I mean, it's kind of unlike almost any other patio because it's more like being in someone's backyard. You have these
Huge trees growing up in the middle of it.
You have the barbecue often going off to the side that you can kind of smell as you sit there. It's a lovely spot.
Withrow Park or Riverside Park? Where do you go chill?
We're in Withrow more.
Okay.
My son was part of the Withrow Ball Hockey League this year, which is an epic community organization. I'm sure some of your listeners have seen that. It's amazing. So yeah, I think Withrow we'd be at more often. I love the farmers market there on Saturday as well.
And then for your commuting, we said off the top we ride bikes together. That's more the Lycra orientation. But you're right on the subway line. Are you a transit guy, a driver, or a cyclist? How do you get around Toronto?
Subway. I get around subway whenever I can. Occasionally streetcar, but subway's my favorite mode of transport. I find it's reliable. I think lots of the time, most of the time, the vast majority of the time, and I like that I can kind of get on and either do emails or listen to a podcast and don't have to sort of think about driving or anything like that.
Love it. A little bit of Toronto there with Andrew Graham and a whole lot of advice and insight into Canada's fintech sector. Thank you so much for joining us. If you want to hear or see more of Andrew Graham, he's on the social media platforms at Andrew T. Graham. And again, throw his name in Google and you're going to get lots of hits. Thanks so much, Andrew. We'll see you again soon and probably on the road.
This is For the Love of TO.